Can you, shall we get started?
Okay.
Listen, I had a very eventful day in the sense that I started the day, and those of you who are corporate that have run boards know that you go into a board meeting or an annual general meeting, you don't know what's going to happen, so you're always a little bit concerned about what's going to happen. We had one, it went perfectly well, so I'm presumably relaxed, but then I had to get on my knees. I'm not a particularly religious person, but I got on my knees praying for people to show up. And now I'm praying and getting on my knees to pray for the internet connections to work, because there are two people that could not join us because of the strike. It became impossible for them to join us. And that was Simone Mori and Pawel Jablonski from Warsaw. They were from out of town, so that made it impossible for them to attend. I will ask both Simone and Mr. Jablonski to turn on their camera so we can see them on the screen now. I hope that is the case. Unfortunately, I'm not the master of the Zoom. The master of the Zoom is somewhere in there. But having said all this on kind of settling down in, we gambled. We had the vision at some point late yesterday, of transforming this into a totally virtual meeting. And then we decided that we rolled the dice and we hope that people will show up. There's an old movie, you know that one, Michael, if you build it, they will come. And I can't remember what, Field of Dreams it was called. And some people came. We hope that some other will come. There is free food and free drinks at the end of all this, if that is an inducement. But to make a long story short, I'm not sure what the problem is, but to make a long story short, the topic of the day is a topic of great importance: energy transition with energy security. We are now in a situation where Europe has really launched itself with the European Green Deal, has launched itself on the Fit for 55, with the NDC in a full-hearted transformation, a historical transformation. Many of you have been part of that process, and if there's anybody at the origin of this, is certainly one of our panelists today, just Delbeke, but many of the people in this room have been part of that. So we invited a number of people to be part of this conversation. So Pawel Jablonski, Undersecretary of State for Economic Development and Cooperation and Development Cooperation in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Poland. On my right also, Jos Delbeke. I don't know if I have to introduce Jos Delbeke. I mean, I will not introduce Jos Delbeke because I think that's embarrassing. I have a book signed by Jos that my staff, when they come in, they read it, Jos, so you have to know that. And the man that has been very kind to me when I was in Brussels and I changed institutions. So Jos, thank you very much for taking the time, and I appreciate this. Simone Mori, head of Europe in NL, also somebody that we have known for many years, and NL has been a great supporter of ERCST over the years, and welcome, Simone. We understand that you couldn't leave Brussels today. Gabriel Gauthier, CEO, High Representative for the EU institution, SVP, European Affairs at Total Energies, and somebody that I've met only very recently, but a pleasure, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation. And then finally, Luc Triangle, General Secretary, Industrial Europe. We are ERCST, with a very complicated and long name, but we try to be balanced. And that's important to us. We try to be balanced. We try to make sure all voices are heard. Mr. Jablonski, I'm sure that you have now joined us, and I'm happy that you have joined us. Thank you very much for taking the time. I know it was difficult for you from Brussels. I also understand that it's probably with great effort that you join us today, and I want to thank you for that, and we very much appreciate this. I hope to have the opportunity to meet you in Brussels. I'm joined in moderating this by Michael Mehling, who is a board member of ERCST and a friend. Michael?
Thank you, Andrei, and also my greetings to all who have ventured the strike to come here in person, and of course to the panelists. I'm, as Andrei mentioned, on the board of ERCST, which gives me this pleasure to come here to Brussels today for the annual general meeting and also to collaborate with Andrei and with ERCST on a number of projects. My day job, if you like, is as deputy director of a center at MIT, the MIT Center for Energy and Environmental Research, Policy Research. And just by way of sort of a few words about the topic today, I was just last week on September 14th speaking to an assembly, a whole room of utility executives or energy sector executives. And that morning, of course, Ursula von der Leyen had given her State of the Union speech. And so I was able to put on the screen, on the slide, some of the quotes about a paradigm shift and, wholesale reforms of the electricity market, et cetera. Suffice it to say, they were totally flabbergasted about the scale, the speed, the pace of things that are happening here in Europe. Of course, the US is in some ways in a much more enviable position when it comes to energy security, resources, et cetera, but they do also face some of the challenges with reliability of electricity systems, growing penetration of variable renewable energy, how to ensure remuneration not only for the short term, but also for the long term sort of investment signals. So there's a lot of interest also on the other side of the Atlantic, how Europe is experimenting and navigating this crisis, including with policy reforms. And I'm pretty sure we'll dig pretty deep on some of these questions tonight. Back to you, Andrei.
Well, thank you, and Michael and I have done this a few times until now. We have a series of interviews with and some of the head of delegation, head of the Glasgow meeting, COP meeting. So we've done, Ambassador, Deputy Minister Khalid Abouleif and a number of others as an interview. So we try to do a ping pong. Now. We'll try. What we want is to give the opportunity to our panelists to give an introduction, an icebreaker, address the issue as they see fit. We didn't want to put too many borders around what they can address. So I'll start with Pawel Jablonski in Warsaw. So energy transition is energy security. The Polish government, if nothing else, had strong opinions on this. There's no doubt about it. It's not something that you haven't addressed. So, Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, and thank you most for having me here. I deeply regret I can't join you physically in Brussels. Nonetheless, I'm happy to be able to participate this virtually, and even more so because the importance of the topic is indeed huge, and I'm not exaggerating at all. Now, we already are observing a phenomenon which to some has been quite surprising to notice, while we even if the recent years were economically quite challenging, the inflation was already rising, the prices were already getting higher and higher. I think many of us did not expect the problems to be as important as they are now, and as significantly felt by our countries, by our societies. The prices that are felt both by the consumers, also by industry, various businesses have already indicated, not just in Poland, but in many other countries, that they need to either suspend or limit the production because of the gas prices, for example, or electricity prices. This is a phenomenon that we haven't had experience in Europe for a good 3 or 4 decades. So, in fact, where we are here now, and the question is not just what we can do about this, but also what can we do to avoid even further problems. And it is true that Poland and Polish government have been quite vocal about this for several reasons. One of them is that because of our historical situation, because of our post-communist heritage, where we were not able to build sustainable energy system, we've been very much reliant on fossil fuels, most of all on coal. Our energy mix is still far from optimal in terms of using various sources. We were never allowed to build nuclear energy. We were very much dependent on coal, and this creates a lot of problems still. Nonetheless, there are many other factors that are felt negatively felt not just in Poland, but in other European countries, not resulting just from coal, but also from other sources, rising, skyrocketing gas prices, and also obviously scarcity of the resource itself, put us in a situation where we no longer can be certain where we will be able to ensure both the supply to households as well as to various parts of our economy, supply in quantities as they were even last year. So the question is, could have this been avoided, and is there a way out of it? And in our view, it certainly could have been avoided. It's not about now pointing fingers and just putting blame on who hasn't done something, but I am afraid that we neglected, as Europe collectively, we neglected our duty in ensuring that we have this safeguards to avoid such crises. There was very big optimism about very rapid transition to not just going away from fossil fuels, but also to phase out nuclear power in some countries. And there was this very big optimism that we are economically as vibrant, so vibrant that we will simply manage to handle the rising costs. It turned out to be false, and just a couple of months shown that we have big problems in maintaining the economy afloat, and we have also big signs of growing social unrest in many countries. So this is going to be a problem if we want to do something about it. Now the question, can something be done about it? And our answer is certainly we can do it, but it obviously requires political decision-making, political courage, and also admitting that we have made some mistakes. Because it's out of the question. We all want to have clean energy. We want to reduce the emissions. We already managed to do a lot as Europe. We are only responsible for 8 or 9% of global emissions, depending on the data that we use. And we still need to drive the change. However, we at the same time need to be sure that it will be sustainable. And if we continue on this road that we have been so far, and if we continue to go without realizing that the costs will be unbearable to our societies, then we will have political opposition to that, and we will have more and more growing opposition to ambitious climate goals. We'll have more and more voices that are challenging these goals. So if we want to actually achieve these goals, the approach must be more sustainable. Now the question is, what can be done? For example, our government has proposed that we maintain the price of emission permits at the level of 30 euros, which it was more or less the higher mark until mid-2020. This was the price. It started to grow very quickly after that. Now it's around 70 euros. It used to be even close to 100. This is additional element of the price that is very much felt both by the economy, also by the households. This hasn't. This is one of the proposals. There are some others. I don't want to get into details at this point, but I believe we have tools at our hand, not just limiting the gas, the usage of the gas, usage of electricity, but we also can reduce some burdens that we have imposed on ourselves, maybe with good intentions, maybe with good and bona fide goals in mind. But in these difficult times, we need to reevaluate our purposes and also our capabilities.
Thank you, Minister. So clearly, you sketch out the daunting challenges that lie ahead. Of course, some have mentioned this as a challenge to decarbonization. Others have said it might be an opportunity. Jos, what do you think is the net effect?
Well, thank you, Michael. Well, I think it's good to listen to the arguments, and to a large extent, I agree with the analysis. Now, where I would have some comments is about what is the way forward. And one of the questions that we were discussing before is what happened. Was that a shock to happen? Is it an ongoing process that was coming under pressure, or was the Russian invasion something new? And I would like to underline that, in my view, the Russian invasion came unexpected, and it was hitting the transition, the low carbon transition, we were almost halfway. We have been reducing, say, roughly 25%. We have to go to 55%. And then came, bang, the war and the upheaval on energy markets. There was already some nervousness, but there was a bit of surprise. Now, what I would say is that the last thing we should do is put a question mark behind the targets that we have been agreeing and that we have been putting in law, 55% by 2030, climate neutrality by 2050. I think we should not touch that. And I'm sorry to say, Pawel, when I hear what you are saying, if we are going to cap the price, that is much lower compared to the price that is today on the markets, then we are not going to deliver the target. So we are going to undermine the delivery of the target. So we can discuss, but I think whatever we do, we should not in a direct or an indirect manner undermine the target. Now, having said that, it's not going to be nice for our figures on greenhouse gases. We have to scramble for all possible solutions because of the disappearance of gas. So we have to use, yes, coal, yes, lignite, yes, old nuclear power stations we were planned to phase out. So in the next 1 or 2 years, we are not going to see a nice picture, in particular not on the greenhouse gas emissions record. But on the medium to long term, and that I mean in the perspective 2030, I would be somewhat more positive. When I look around, how rough it is to admit the high energy prices are kicking everybody to a realization that we have to save energy, that we have to insulate our houses, that we have to go for heat pumps, that we have to put solar panels on our roofs, that we have to deploy even more renewable energy like wind, onshore, offshore, etc. So the changes I see in my immediate environment make me more hopeful. And what I also hear in industry, where there is indeed also a sense of panic, you know, in the short term, these high energy prices are hitting our business. But at the same time, where should we invest? What should we do in the long term to make sure that we are not reliable any longer on fossil fuels? So continuing with fossil fuels is not part of the solution. What I deduct from that is that we have to double down on moving them out. And I see lots of good elements emerging, but fully understood the first 1, 2, perhaps 3 years, it will depend on the end of the war and the atrocities that are happening there, are not going to be nice and pleasant when we observe the figures. Which leads me to the second point. What is the problem is, of course, the position of natural gas. We see not only energy prices are very high, but also it's simply not available. So we have to cut down on gas. That's what we are doing. And that is where we have a quite brutal effect on the functioning of the ETS. The ETS, Europe's carbon market, has been thriving since the beginning from a process that was switching away fuel use from coal to gas. Now, gas is no longer there. So the machine to bring down emission reductions quite significantly has come to a halt and even works in reverse. So that's a problem we face because gas has disappeared. And gas was part of the transition fuel that we would normally use in the coming, say, decade before we were fully decarbonized in the power sector. And so what is the conclusion I would draw out of that? You could say we have to put the ETS on hold. I would strongly disagree on that. I think we need the price level that we are currently having to keep the focus on phasing out fossil fuels. So the price we currently are having, 60 to 90 euros, in that range. If we stay in that range, let's keep that range. I think it's a useful one to orientate investors, consumers, to the right technological solutions. So that price level is healthy. But I do understand behind the reasoning that Pawel was making, that if the ETS price would go through the roof, would go over the 100 euros to 150 or 200 euros, then that we may face a problem. Because high ETS prices today do not immediately lead to a reduction of emissions. And that is a brutal reality that is going to be there for 1 to 2 years. So my argumentation would be, let's make sure we are not going with the carbon prices through the roof, but we keep the price level more or less where it is, so as to orientate investors and consumers towards the long term. And if need be, we could bring some allowances that we would bring to the market at the end of the period before 2030, say in 2026 or 27 or 28, we could bring them now forward to the market. And in order to make sure that the prices are not going to rise as fast as we have seen, which led to some comments and remarks, and that was not facilitating also the negotiations, as we have seen in the European Parliament, where people were saying, is there not irregular speculation at hand, etc.? Now, ESMA has said it is not, but still, there was a political nervousness on a too rapid increase in prices. So we could use the flexibility in the ETS. The flexibility is not only where you can choose where to reduce your emissions, you can also choose that over time. And so if we have now a rough time for 1, 2, or 3 years, perhaps we should consider that. And that brings me to my last point. That is exactly what the European Commission has been suggesting in cashing in some 20 billion through the carbon market. The Commission suggested the market stability reserve. Some other views are, let's bring forward allowances under the Innovation Fund. You know, we can debate that. We should not touch the target in a direct or indirect manner. We should stick to that 2030 target, but we should perhaps use the revenues that are now implicitly available to kickstart those technologies that we need. The green hydrogen, the low carbon steel, the low carbon cement, things that are expensive in their first phase and that need to be kickstarted for the future of Europe. So the avenue is good, and that is a remarkable thing under the ETS. The attention shifts from not only what price should we have to also using the revenues in a much more considered manner. And that's a healthy development, and as the price is considerable, the revenues are considerable. The Innovation Fund that I negotiated, I think 2016 or 17, we thought it would raise 5 billion euros. Today, the expectation is it may raise 60 up to 80. Some would even say up to 100 billion euros. So this is a pot of money that we could, if wisely used, we could kickstart the technologies that we need. Final word, we have also a CBAM proposal in the making. We should indeed have a protection for our competitiveness. But there is one thing that is worrying me, and that is, while I'm happy as a climate policy maker on what you mentioned, Michael, in the United States, the Inflation Reduction Act, where I'm a little worried is that the United States is not charging or pricing carbon, but is subsidizing carbon or carbon reduction up to an extent we have not seen as of now. And also the slightly protectionist nature. It should happen in the United States. While we should join forces, the geopolitical situation of Europe has changed with Russia, being alienated from anything we have been doing. So I hope that in the CBAM discussion and the Climate Club discussion, we can have a very fruitful and mature exchange of views on that, because we will have to sort it out. Thank you very much.
Thank you. When I came to Brussels, and I had no idea who Delbeke was, but Charles Nicholson said, you want to lead AIDA, you haven't been to Brussels. So I learned one thing. I think that whenever Jos always closes, he has 5 points. So that I remember. Now I have 5 points. So that I learned that, and I'm trying to use that sometimes to the degree I can. Now, talk about transition, because energy transition, energy security, if there is a company that is leading in transition, not the only one, but certainly one of the leading companies that are leading in transition and have transformed itself, because I have known Simone Enel since the mid-90s with the E7, with the club of large power companies in the world. And the Enel that I see today is a very different Enel. It is all renewable, and it's a global company. So please tell us, your views on this, if you want, this sentence, energy transition with energy security.
Thank you, Andrei. Thank you for the invitation and taking part in this meeting. I'm very sorry for not being with you physically today, but as you said, it was really impossible to fly for me to Brussels today. Anyway, energy transition and energy security. I believe that there is a strange point of view undergoing this debate, which is in some way that the crisis is happening because we have not enough fossil fuels, and the reason is let's say, the energy transition process. No, which is, actually is very strange because the crisis is here because we depend too much on fossil fuels, and so we were not fast enough in managing the transition, and this is very consistent with the fact that if you go back in time, we started to discuss about the gas crisis, Ukrainian political utilization of gas on Russian side since 2006, which was probably the first moment in which we started to discuss about this topic. And there wasn't much improvement since then. On the contrary, we increased, many Western countries increased their dependency on Russian gas, which is very strange if you consider how much we have been doing in order to manage new investments in, for example, in renewables, which should will have the effect of reducing the need of importing fossil fuels. Then, when dealing with this topic, I believe that we must be very careful in pointing at the right causes in order to manage, the potential remedies by keeping very well separated the crisis management and the structural reforms. So this is very important. Those are two different things. We have to manage a crisis which has a volume effect and a price effect. That's not the same. We believe that the price effect may be managed, may be tackled by some regulatory measures. We continue not to understand why the proposal of putting a cap on the gas price at the TTF level in the new contracts without any kind of retroactivity is so much difficult to be promoted at the European level because there is a lot of speculation, because there are huge, enormous windfall profits on the side of producers' countries, not only Russia, but also countries which are closer to us, including Norway. And it's very hard to explain to people why we should finance this massive amount of windfall profits coming from the artificial volatility of a very small and illiquid spot market in Europe. That's very strange. And that's on the price effect. Then I was saying we have to keep separated the management of the crisis with the structural reforms, because when you have to manage a crisis, everything works. Of course, we need to push the coal plants as much as possible in the short term, which doesn't mean that we have to change the mid-term to long-term pattern of the decarbonization journey of Europe. But it's clear, going back to my first point, is that the reason why we are here, and which is such a big difficulty, is that we were not fast enough in deploying our plans as Europeans in terms of renewable developments. And we know the story. This probably will go out of the scope of this conversation, but basically we have technology, we have the finance, we have the companies. The problem is we don't have the administrative procedures, we don't have the permitting procedures, we don't have the time to market of a new investment in renewable is very long in a large majority of European countries, including my country, but this is not the worst example. So we have to accelerate. So we don't have to divert from the direction. We have to accelerate so we sustain 100% of let's say, the basic philosophy of the RePower EU. Jos was mentioning the issue of ETS, which is, I think, an important issue. I understand the criticism to ETS. Today there is a strange paradox, because if you want the effort of ETS is promoting gas demand, which is not exactly what we want, gas utilization, sorry, which is not exactly what we want to promote now. So you have a market mechanism pushing in a direction which is not the proper one. So you need some kind of policies pushing on the other way. But that's that's matter of fact that suspending a market under a crisis situation would be very dangerous for the credibility, or would be very dangerous for companies having credits already provided because of the needs. So probably we may imagine some kind of intervention, interim intervention during the crisis, but while preserving the proper functionality of the market, of the carbon market per se, because in the future we will have to go back to the normal, to the business as usual in order to promote the decarbonization investment. The last point concerns market design. There is a big debate about market design. The Commission just proposed the idea to cap the revenues of the so-called inframarginal technologies. We understand this. We believe that the impact of the so-called inframarginal rents on the energy bills of Europeans has been largely overestimated. Also in the recent declaration of high-level policymakers, because a large part of this energy has been already sold under different schemes, maybe long-term contracts, or because in many countries some mechanisms pushing down the price of renewables and nuclear have already been put in place by the governments. But in any case, the good of the proposal is that it's a typical crisis proposal. You may put it in place relatively quickly. You don't touch the overall mechanism, and you may eliminate those measures as soon as possible once crisis will be over. But the problem is that this proposal is not touching at all the structural need of reform of the market, because at the end of the day, what as a company we are proposing since quite a long period of time is to shift from the present short-term spot-oriented system marginal price market towards a market model which has to be much more focused on long-term contractualization, which will push down prices because it will reduce the gap between the marginal cost and the average cost of technologies. And on the other way, it will help a lot to take long-term investment decisions in order to invest in renewable sources, invest in decarbonized sources, and divest in the technologies that are today contributing to the burden of geopolitical weakness of Europe, which is basically too much dependency of exporting fossil fuels countries. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Simone. Simone already mentioned that, the crisis is hitting different parts of the energy sector differently, and the policy responses are also different. And Total is a company that is diversifying rapidly, but it does have sort of its origins in oil and gas. How do you navigate this crisis? How do you see it?
Do I need to press something? That's fine, I think. Okay. Thank you very much. Well, how do we navigate? First of all, we changed. I will elaborate perhaps a little bit on the trilemma, which is security of supply, because we, I think, are doing a lot for this today for Europe. On the urgency to decarbonize, and then on affordability and who is paying. And we navigate in Europe along these three lines. I've been here for a year. Before that, I was in charge of decarbonization businesses within Total. And when I came here, the urgency was decarbonization, was Fit for 55, and the urgency and the tsunami of text is of initiatives that falls on and helps us to move forward. We're not decarbonizing for this. By the way, we changed our name. We called Total to Total Energies, which is an illustration of the transition and of our own decarbonization effort and the really shift in business models that we're experiencing. But to be very honest, a little bit before the Ukraine crisis, the urgency became the security of supply, the prices of energy. The prices started to rise before the Ukraine crisis. Of course, the shortage of supply, which was anticipated and which is now happening with the probably the shrinking gas coming through the pipes from Russia, has accelerated this phenomenon and the urgency to rethink the security of supply in Europe. So it shifted this point of the trilemma, security of supply, to the first place. However, the decarbonization, the need for decarbonization remains, and I will handle this, and affordability, and I think my neighbor might talk about affordability for industry, is key. What are we noting first on the security of supply issues? Of course, we are already noting a decrease of demand, which has two sides. The good side is that people are starting to see that the first solution to this crisis is to save. However, we have already seen a decrease between 12-20% of industrial demand. And this is because industries, and this is quite terrible, is European industries, but I probably will handle this more, have started to not to produce, to stop, and to shift and to be mobile in the world. So, on the security, so the urgency to supply at an affordable price remains. However, I think the price we're going to experience these higher prices for a number of years before we get back to another level. And the price of energy, we have cheap, abundant energy. The era of cheap, abundant energy is, I think, a little behind us. So we need to rethink a world where energy is no longer as cheap, as abundant as it has been. What can we do for the security of supply of Europe? Gas is not gone yet. And we still need gas, even for the transition. Some, of course, a lot of countries in the world need gas for the transition because it's much less emitting than coal and other types of fossil fuels, first. But second, the dream of a Europe being independent in renewables is not for tomorrow, and we will need gas, decarbonized gases, to store and to make for this intermittency as we increase the dependency on intermittent sources of energy. So what are we trying to do? First of all, the problems are not going to be for next winter because the storages are quite full. They're going to be for 23, 24, 25. There we have to be careful because then the storages will be a little less, and then we have to do something. What we see is, of course, a lot is already done. Of course, we have maximized all the production that we can have. It's a little 10% increase in European production. The solution is LNG. And the 30 to 40 BCM gap is going to be filled with LNG. So we have to attract LNG to Europe. We have to build a little bit of infrastructure with the problem that, of course, we do not want to be too dependent and make a dependency on gas for the next 20 years. We want to have decarbonized gases, and we must probably think upfront of building infrastructure that is transformable or reusable for renewable gases as well. But infrastructure, we need infrastructure. We've seen the problem of having a Europe too dependent from east to west flows. We need to rebalance this. And LNG flowing more in Western Europe, to Spain, France, Italy, and the Netherlands has to flow to Eastern Europe. And our friend, the Minister of Poland, is not going to say the contrary. So we're really heavily trying to make for this gap. We need to be able to strike long-term contracts to make for the volatility of prices. Long-term contracts are a sort of buffer versus this huge volatility of prices. I say this because this is not always well seen by the Commission, long-term contracts. And now, of course, it's seen as a sort of is contrary to the market, free flow, to competition, which has been the dogma of Europe for a number of years. Now, on the urgency, the last thing is we need to learn how to save. And we need to be able to shift demand, as was said before. We need to learn new mechanisms of flexibility, interconnection between countries, solidarity within countries. I will rebound perhaps a little bit on this, because Europe is still very fragmented and very The solidarity between countries is in the Europe of energy. I once was a regulator, a telecom regulator. I've been discovering, for 8 years energy. It's so fragmented. Europe is so fragmented. So we need still to build European energy. Decarbonization, I mean, we as a company are in the middle of it. That's why we changed our name, Total to Total Energies. We want to have in 10 years the same position that we have in fossil fuels in renewables. We want to be one of the top 5 renewable. We want to be an electricity company. So we're massively investing in renewable. And I think our goal is this. However, of course, it's still a little way to go, because we can't do this without society. We can't do this without having a foster for a demand in renewables, for having people who can pay for these more expensive sources of energy, because it has a cost. So without helping companies pay for green hydrogen, or the demand has to be there. So yes, we're massively investing in EV chargers. However, people must be able to have an infrastructure. So infrastructure needs to be built. It's huge investment. There is a constraint on renewable sources. We want renewable energy for everything, to change the heating system, to change for EV chargers, huge renewables. We want that for gas, to build hydrogen. So how are we able to scale up fast enough? This is a challenge. Then, for hard-to-abate sectors in transport, we need renewable gases. Renewable gases, biofuels, biogas, with all the constraints, permitting, no guarantees of origin. Biogas cannot flow throughout Europe. Biogas has still a lot of constraints in the... so we need to streamline that. E-fuels is not for tomorrow. There's a lot of research to be done still. Who is going to pay for that? And how are we going to pay for the affordability? I was listening with great interest, and we know that the ETS rising, the Innovation Fund will be much more. And Innovation Fund has to help our industries and the ETS taxed sectors to decarbonize. We need urgently to have, as we have had in the renewable sector, to help our sector to do this transition in the next 15, 20 years, CFDs, contract for differences, to guarantee a price of carbon, for CCUS that we're badly going to need, for hydrogen business models if we want to produce in Europe. We urgently need that. But perhaps I will touch on this later, we need more Europe. And a system of solidarity between countries, a free flow, and probably we also think we need a reform, which is announced, of the market design. We can no longer have the price of electricity too much based on the price of gas, that for sure. But today the market has gone, it's not even the price of gas I was reading that was fixing the price of electricity. It was the price of the demand, which is high, of industry demand, which is setting the price. The crazy prices we see in electricity, it's the demand prices, because we have a supply problem of cheap energy. So the crisis is, of course, an accelerator of this transition. The transition is going to be difficult, especially for industry, for energy-intensive industry. It's going to be difficult for the most vulnerable ones. It's going to be difficult for the countries that do not have access to LNG, for instance. So the way and the path and the transition needs to be eased, and there are ways for that. But there we need to think all together with society, with governments, and with industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Last but not least, look, we have this long name called Roundtable on Climate Change and Sustainable Transition, because when we were established in different circumstances about 6-7 years ago, we were already very preoccupied with the sustainability of the transition, and sustainable transition means that the social axis is as important as the economic and environmental, or else it ain't sustainable by definition. So we're happy to have Luc Triangle, the General Secretary of Industrial, that will also have his own views, and the views will come, I guess, from the just transition in general, but the just transition from what some would have referred to, that we see parts maybe not major part, but some parts of European industry right now kind of being taking a pause. You know, what I will say, I come from a Canadian power company, and the nightmare was that they were all going to move to the States, and we're going to end up in a death spiral because the customers are leaving. The customers are leaving, the jobs are leaving. Luke.
Yeah, thank you very much for also inviting Industrial Europe. We are the European Trade Union Federation, organizing the workers, the employees, blue collar, white collar, in industrial manufacturing and also in the energy sectors. So in my introduction, I would like to highlight 3 urgencies that we face currently altogether. Not surprising that I will start with the social urgency. The social urgency is clearly there. Studies and not just assumptions show already today that almost half of the households in Europe struggle to make ends meet at the end of the month. And this is a growing number. This is a Eurofound study. I invite you to look at that. It's shocking to see what the reality is on the ground in the communities, in the villages of the different European countries. Especially low-income people, where there is a low income, but also middle class are suffering today to pay their energy bills. It depends from country to country. In Estonia today, for a low income in Estonia, the energy bill goes over 30% today already. So it's unpayable. People will not be able, it's as simple as that, they will not be able to pay their energy bill in a few weeks or in a few months. That's the reality. So we have a growing number of, or the poverty is increasing due to the current crisis. And we also see that it's not only depending on having a job or having no job. We have also a growing number of working poor that used not to be a European reality. That was more a reality in, let's say, United States or other countries. But we have now also this reality in Europe where people are working, 2 incomes are working, but they can't pay the bills at the end of the month. So, and this is also strengthened or increased in urgency by indeed what we see happening today in industry. Hundreds of thousands of workers today don't work. It's not that they lost their job, but the companies are not producing anymore. They stopped production. In the best case scenario, temporarily. So let's hope for the better. Let's hope for the best, that they will restart soon again. But when will be soon, knowing what's going on today? But also other companies just closed down, and other companies decided to leave Europe. So hundreds of thousands of workers are also in that reality, that they are getting unemployed today by the fact that their company decided to close down the production. And in that sense, we, to be honest, we are and we have been very disappointed last week, Wednesday, with the State of the Union. Because the social dimension of this whole crisis, look for it. Where has it been mentioned? So we have, in that sense, clear demands. We believe that in the COVID crisis, the European Commission did the right thing. You probably remember, sure, the program, 100 billion euro to support workers and people that were hit by the COVID crisis and that lost their jobs, to support them, income support. Well, we are hoping that the Commission and Europe will decide to go for a short 2.0, because we will need a similar program to support people that are indeed now victim of the current crisis. And not surprising, you see also the inflation rates, not only by energy prices, because in general, all prices are rising. When you go to the supermarket, we all know it, we see it. Well, we also think that higher wages is a fair demand today to compensate workers and employees for the fact that the inflation is indeed undermining their purchasing power. Then, okay, not all companies will like it here maybe, but we believe that the windfall profits that are made by some companies and by some sectors should be targeted. There needs to be a tax on windfall profits, profits that are actually coming in without having done something more than just producing what you did before. And we also agree that reform of the energy markets and the price setting should also be targeted and should also be part of the solution for the social dimension. So this is one urgency, the social urgency. But then there is the industrial urgency. That's my second urgency. Energy-intensive industries employing 8 million workers in Europe are in the front line of the current crisis because they need energy to produce. And it would be very bad if at the end of the day we are faced with the reality that these industries decide to move part of their production out of Europe. Or that even entire subsectors of these industries would leave Europe because of the current crisis. Because once they go, they will not come back. So I support those entrepreneurs that speak about an existential crisis for certain parts of European industry, about their future. I support that, because we see that happening today. I was last week in Germany talking to the metalworking companies, the CEOs. Well, I'm not talking about the big names, I'm talking about smaller and middle-sized companies. Well, they are indeed looking to other parts for production. Not that they are not happy with what they have here, but it's indeed not possible to continue. So in that sense, this existential crisis, this existential threat for the future of our industries in Europe is absolutely there. In that sense, again, reform of energy market and price setting is also important. And then the last urgency is the climate urgency. I took note of what Jos Delbeke said, and I think what he said is really important. Yes, we will have to find short-term solutions for supply, and that includes, and I quote him now, coal, lignite, and other fossil fuels, but short-term. And I think we need to support that. We need to make sure that there is an energy supply and energy security for the next months and for the next short-term period. But we also know that climate doesn't wait. There is an issue, climate, what we have seen in the global south, if I may say, Pakistan and others, the disasters, climate disasters that have taken place in certain parts of Europe, of the world, I'm sorry. We had a heat wave, fine, but what happened in other parts of the world was 100 times worse. So that debate, that reality doesn't change and cannot be put on hold. That cannot be put on hold. So in that sense, we need to continue to put the 2030 targets and the 2050 targets at the front of our debates. And in that sense, we are also criticizing, as Industrial Europe, a little bit the panicking decisions that are currently taken by a number of countries. For instance, on building new infrastructure for gas, LNG, pipelines, and so on. I quote here what you also can read is that we are currently investing or constructing up to 4 or 5 times more than what we really need on gas terminals and on gas pipelines. So that will end up with stranded assets in a few years' time due to the fact that we are not coordinating our efforts and that it's actually more decisions taken by panic and not by common sense or by logic. The same with gas contracts. Long-term gas contracts might harm the 2030 targets and the 2050 targets. And last sentence, President, is that yes, workers want to have clarity, and that's about just transition. For us, the whole debate about the climate agenda of the EU should not be put in question, but don't forget that workers in those sectors want to have clarity about their future. I quote here the Vice President and the President of the European Commission, no one will be left behind in this green transition. Well, don't forget that. We are now in a new reality than a year ago, but don't forget that we have to pick up people. If not, we lose people, also the support of people and citizens on this green agenda. So this for my introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. A fascinating story and different views from different stories. The intention was very much in a way for us to use this opportunity, which is one opportunity. We're the only dialogue, and this dialogue needs to continue because this crisis is not going to go away. I think, Gabrielle, you mentioned quite clearly this is not going to happen tomorrow. Looking at why it happened, because I think there is some importance as to why it happened. I don't think you can just sweep it. My mother used to say, well, it happened, now you got to do this. I said, well, Mom, you should have thought about it like 5 years ago. But so why it happened is important. And then we have to look what to do in the future. But we cannot be this completely divorced and, stuff happens, as Colin Pawel would say. So, what happened? I mean, what happened is that there was a rush to gas. And then what happened is that assets were taken off the market, maybe at a rate that was unsustainable. And we ended up in a situation that was getting up, as you said, Gabrielle, that the prices were going up, but then we get hit by the crisis and there was nothing to switch back to, which we used to. We used to switch back to nukes, we used to switch back to gas, we used to switch back to something, but there's nothing to switch back. So we end up in this very, very difficult situation. The one thing that I will tell you one thing is I'm Canadian, and I do remember, I'm an electrician, so I know anything about oil and gas or other industries, but I do remember a number of years ago, if there's anybody here from Hydro-Quebec or Quebec, will know that there was an ice storm in Quebec, and they have 2,000 kilometers worth of transmission line from James Bay to Montreal. And it's a Canadian phenomenon called an ice rain, where the transmission lines went down in the middle of February, and in about 3 days, people were physically fighting over Honda generators. So society has a way of falling apart very, very quickly if people are left in the dark and cold. So it's something that we need to take very, very seriously how we go ahead. I'd like to start with a few questions, and then we'll switch back to the audience, because you have this is a very modern room, or the principle is very modern. You got microphones in your handrests. But the one question to Pawel Jablonski was, what is causing the shock? I mean, what do you think, Pawel? Were we on the way, or the well-planned transition, and everything was, going swimmingly, and all of a sudden, whoops, we got hit by this war in Ukraine, and then everything fell off the rails? Or is there more to it, to the story? Was there this sustainable before that? Or is this simply a fact that we hadn't planned well and that the situation is simply aggravated? Because it is important to understand what happened, because we do have this transition. It's not going to stop overnight. It's not something that will be done overnight, so we need to understand. And whether, Luke is talking about too much LNG. Josh, you're proposing short-term solutions, which I would tend to agree with, because we can't lose industry for a short-term problem that we hope to get over. So, Pawel, what do you think? Is this something that was very well planned and it just act of Moscow and everything got off the rails, or what happened?
Well, I think the answer is very simple, but it's not very pleasant, certainly. The answer is that it wasn't very well planned at all. It was planned with refusal to accept that reality might change overnight. When we hear that it's a shock, a surprise, that one of the speakers said that everything was going well, but then suddenly, out of nowhere, Russia attacked and nobody could have predicted. Well, I'm sorry to say this. There were many that have been predicting this, and there were many that were warning other European countries about getting too close to cooperate in cooperation with Russia. Poland was one of them. And if we are going to continue on this road, when we are saying that our current situation is difficult, but the prices are healthy, we should keep them the way they are. Well, they are not healthy. 300, 500% spikes in the period of 1 year. This is not a healthy situation. This is not a healthy. If our households, if our businesses would hear our discussion and this notion that these prices are healthy, I wouldn't like to be in a room with them, with people that would be told these things, because this is the opposite of healthy. We are in a situation that we partially brought on ourselves because of the fact that we didn't have any contingency plan. We didn't have any viable contingency plan. And if we speak about ETS that we started the discussion with, obviously the intention was good. The intention was to contain and to have an additional incentive to reduce emissions. But as we all know already, the price has surged. It's surged 300, sometimes 400% in the period of 2 years. It's no longer fulfilling its purpose. It's no longer reducing emissions. To the contrary, actually, and we keep hearing that we should keep it on the same level because it is healthy. This is difficult to agree with. If we continue to do this, we will have more surprises, so to say. If this can be surprise any longer, the social impact. What was said, and I think the last of the speakers was mentioning this. What is really important, we already experienced that 2 years ago in France with Gilets jaunes and some other countries, and people today already are taking to the streets. They are burning their electricity bills. Governments are preparing some packages. A Polish government has proposed a plan to freeze the price of energy for the household, to introduce some financial packages for municipalities, for those that are most affected. But there are limits to it. And if we are in this situation where we refuse to even discuss that the targets can be, it's not about the targets, it's about our ability to reach them. And if we refuse to discuss our abilities, well, we will unfortunately face more surprises. So the answer to the question is not what causes, but how to avoid similar situations in the future. Be ready to consider that we have made some mistakes and we need to embrace it. We need to reevaluate our plans. This is our answer.
Thank you, Minister. I'd invite both Jos and Simone maybe to react to this and also previous comments of the panelists, but more generally a question I ask myself, for 2 decades and more, we've really been pushing so hard in Europe and other parts of the world to liberalize energy markets. We've been defending the EU ETS against a lot of calls to intervene, in the prices, etc. Is the era of sort of deregulation and reliance on markets, is it coming to an end? Are we rethinking fundamentally? And I did hear you suggest, that there should maybe be a range of prices that we want to have. Is there a change also in attitude? So to both of you, your reaction.
Well, perhaps to take the last point, the point I was making is that we should come this crisis through until energy markets have stabilized, because what we are seeing is really exceptional. If we see prices in 3 months' time going up with a factor 300, 500, up to 800%, this is quite exceptional. Let's face up, that could not be foreseen. And I know, Pawel, in Poland, there was more sensitivity to what was happening in the East, and I appreciate that. But I have to say that when it comes to the security of supply argument, that I have not been hearing that argument over the last decade in a very forceful manner. And that is what we have to, we were in an era where the EU was taking a kind of open trade perspective. And we all thought that through handel durch wandel, that we, through trading, we would get more normal relations, also with regimes that were very different. Think about China, think about Russia, but it turned out the other way around. And that is a bitter awakening. I fully agree to that, but I think it was hard to see what is currently unfolding, even today. The speech we have been hearing from Mr. Putin, is unbelievable. You get used to the messages, but it sinks in deeper and it gets worse by the day. So I think what we are seeing is quite exceptional. And I have been participating in some off-the-line discussions with captains of industry, also for those who were pleading in the past a long way to do business with Russia. And he said very bluntly, the page has been turned. If the war was to stop tomorrow, trust in Russia has gone. And that has gone for probably a decade or more. So if we would fall in love tomorrow and we have a peace deal and all the rest of it, I think that all captains of industry, including authorities, would be much more cautious and diversify the risks much more. So that comes a little bit to the question of Pawel, was it planned? Well, what was it planned? It was planned that the use of natural gas would be a swing fuel for a decade. We knew that. All economic analyses that have been made on climate since the year 2000 indicate that we would move out of fossil fuels and that we would transit from coal and lignite to gas and then to the low carbon sources, the debate being open whether it was renewables or there was nuclear. You know, some member states went for nuclear, some went for renewables. That was the plan. And that plan was the wrong plan. You know, now we know that, but we have to admit that. Is it a mistake? Well, issues of war, you know, are always a mistake behind the fact. But just to say that when it comes to was it planned? Yes, it was planned. Was it a mistake? Yes, it was a mistake. But, you know, things happen as they are unfolding. Now, do we still believe in markets? I would be very cautious in all this very rapid calls for changing the market rules on electricity, etc. We should do that probably, but we should do it in a very careful and cautious manner. We should not do it overnight, and we should distinguish between what we should do in the short term. You know, we have a short-term problem, and I do not deny that. We have to support people. We have a crisis. We are in a war economy mood. But deriving from there a market reform that we will need for a couple of decades, I would be cautious into that. So that's one element. And the only thing I was making on the ETS, you know, the ETS should stay there for the reasons I indicated. If we would not have a consistent signal to reduce carbon through economic operators, if we would not have that, we will not deliver the targets. And then I think we have to come clear and say, we are dropping the target. And that is what I do not hear anybody say. I see doubts in what you have been saying, Pawel, but I do not see a majority for putting the climate targets into question for the reasons we all know. Pakistan was mentioned. We had the heat waves here. We had the flooding. You know, people fully realize that something serious is happening and that there is no way back to the use of fossil fuels. I think that is a common understanding. We have to handle the short-term crisis. So on the market, yes, we can have some liquidity if necessary, some liquidity raised into the market, but only to the extent it is necessary. And for the rest, if the market price stays in the range 60 to 90 euros, I think that's the level we can swim through. Consistent and coherent signal. Long-term carbon is becoming more expensive. We encourage low carbon innovation. And when the market, the energy market stabilizes, we can assess where we are.
Thanks. Simone?
Well, the impact of the crisis on citizens, on the society has been raised several times. And of course, it's a very important issue for our economy, for our society. But you know, it's very difficult to blame something. I mean, we are depending on something that we don't have, and we have to buy it the price, which is just out of the market for several reasons. So I mean, it's absolutely reasonable to ask a question how to do, but you know, it's the problem is to be practical. And in order to be practical, I think we have to look at the dynamics of the market, of the gas market especially, trying to separate what are the fundamentals and what is the price we are paying on top of the fundamentals. And that's the reason why I go back to my first point. We strongly believe that something should be done in a short period of time in order to cap the price and the volatility of gas at the spot level, because there is no reason to determined to create this huge amount of windfall profit which are paid by European citizen and companies. And again, all the other measures which have been discussed and introduced are touching, the secondary effects. We may discuss a lot about, the power market reform. We might discuss a lot about ETS reform, but this is not the issue. This is not where the big impact is. It was the economists, I think, if I'm not wrong, Andrei, a couple of weeks ago, evaluating in 40,000 euros per Norwegian citizen, the value of the extra price of gas in 2022. It's a lot of money. I think we should intervene urgently on that. On the trilemma, which is another point which has been raised, the trilemma is a very important point. But again, there is no contradiction. It's very clear that today, the debate on market power reform is because the renewables are the cheapest energy sources. So the problem is not to limit and to stop the progress. The problem is how to accelerate in order to make these cheap resources more available to everybody, in order also to reduce, not only in terms of economics and competitiveness, but also in terms of independency, how to accelerate the process. We did good or bad. What is clear today, I think, is that there was not enough analysis on how to coordinate the phasing in and phasing out of different technologies. There was a lot of debate. There were many conferences. There was a lot of lobbying, a lot of clash among different vested interests, but not enough deep analysis on how to reconcile the phasing in of new technologies, renewable decarbonized technologies, and the phasing out of fossil fuels. And probably we are a very good example because we took part in many debates, and you know it very well. But probably we are the only players in several countries investing in new gas-fueled plants, because we know that in the midterm we need to have some flexibility resources. And those are plants which will be built not in order to be operated 1,000 hours per year, but just to guarantee the proper backup. So this was in some way a marginal aspect of the debate. And what we are discovering now, unfortunately, that instead of discussing on how to produce hydrogen by adding more gas to our fuel mix, which was a very strange idea of the recent past, on how to guarantee the fact that we have enough capacity of the old from old fleets, while the new one is coming on and progressing thanks to the European plans for decarbonization.
There are microphones in the handrest of your seats. I assume they work, and maybe it's a big assumption, but we do hope they work. And I'd like to ask you to raise your hand, and if you have a question, try to restrain in terms of making long comments. But if there is a short comment or a question that the panelists can react to, we're happy to take it from the audience, because you braved the strike and the difficulties in being here, and you're here, and would like to give you that opportunity. So should you wish to take it. And yeah, go ahead, please. Do you have the mic? Let's hope it works. Button? You have to push the button.
Okay, I pushed the button. Is now better? Yeah. It's okay. Jarosław Pietras, I'm working for Martin Center, working on these issues as well. My question is following. There are two elements. One is energy security. For many years, energy security was coming via long-term contracts, which stabilized deliveries and prices. Now I haven't heard really clearly from where energy security is going to come from in a longer term. I mean, that's because we have to also think in just opening of the markets, having diversification of sources and so on. But it is not very clear whether we've got a clear instrument providing energy security. And second, on energy transition. I agree fully with Jos saying the worst moment to take a radical decision is when you've got a shock or a very unexpected situation. Because markets will work, and let's look into what happens in several years from now. And then how we are going to provide energy transition. I assume that it will have to go via prices. Therefore, ETS has provided price signals to ensure energy transition. So the question is whether current high level of prices, which might be lower later, will be sufficient to provide this energy transition. Thank you.
Thank you. And, or what a lot of people said, never let a good crisis go to waste. Anyone else? People are shy. I can't believe you're shy. You guys have nothing to ask this nice people? There's here Julia. And there's a button somewhere, Julia.
Yes, I think I found it. Thank you, Andrei. It's Julia Michalak from International Emissions Trading Association. I have one comment and one question, if I may. A comment is on what has been said about the situation we are having right now with no fuel switch being encouraged because there is no gas and because what we have is so expensive that coal is coming back, lignite's coming back, and black coal will likely see to rebound in emissions. And my reflection is that actually this is why cap and trade is so important. This is why having a cap, that element that maybe we were not focused so much in the recent years, discussing more market design of the EU ETS and price formation, the scarcity and so on. We haven't been focusing on a cap maybe enough. But I think that right now this is so crucial that whatever will be happening with a coal coming temporarily back and emissions rising, there is this a guarantee that cap is providing us with that we won't exceed the limit. And the second one is a question to Mr. Jablonski. You expressed many concerns about the EU ETS price adding a burden to, of course, currently high energy prices. An additional burden, it says to be less than 10% price component, comparing to other elements that impact the power price. Nevertheless, indeed, it is a 10%. And there are many solutions being right now discussed in the context of the EU ETS revision. We have on the table proposal for a targeted review of Article 29A. We have a proposal to monetize MSR allowances, so to raise funds for the RePower EU. And this proposal specifically is being right now debated with some alternative options, like to take money from the Innovation Fund. Though I would expect Poland to lead a call to monetize early the Modernization Fund. I was wondering why you're not, or maybe you are discussing that internally. I'd be interested to hear more about front-loading of the Modernization Fund allowances, so to raise funds for the RePower EU. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. Anyone else? I'd like to take a couple of more questions and then have a final round. Oh, go ahead, please. Just introduce yourself. And don't forget the button.
Thank you. Lieve Stalmans, trying to understand the whole energy challenges we are facing currently. I heard from the panelists indeed that solutions have to be as good as possible European-wide with European united action. It's probably also not wise to very suddenly change ETS or EU internal energy market rules. And at the same time, electricity prices are hurting citizens and industry. Now, that having said, we are having an EU internal energy market, while on the other hand, the gas flow into Europe, it's a matter of geopolitics. It's not as such really a market. So the question to the panelists is if they could comment on what Spain has tried so far already by working on the marginal pricing concept, working on the cost of the gas supply to power producers, where a little injection of money into that cost of the gas for the power plants is giving a market-wide reduction of the electricity price. And so that could work on the Iberian Peninsula, because the Pyrenees were keeping the electricity locally, But if I combine what the panelists said, if you do this European-wide, there are few electrons flowing out of Europe. And if there is a united European action where not with the shoot but with the shell, the societal funds, because that is what currently member states are doing, they are using societal financial means. If you inject them, then at least I read in the Belgian KNAK from a person knowledgeable from the Belgian energy regulator, that if you inject 80 million euro, you get a 400 million euro societal return, because it's only 80 million euro gas subsidy, and I agree it's subsidy, it's not market, but you get a 400 million euro return on the electricity. So question to the panelists is, could such a solution be foreseen as a kind of a short-term intervention?
Thank you very much. I would stop now because unfortunately also there's a time. I also urge you not to leave right away because there's food and drinks and there are no doggy bags. So if you want, you can have it here. Luke, we'll start this way with Luke and then Gabrielle. Then we'll go to Joss and then Simone and then Pawel, if that is okay. Let's try a short intervention, the answers, and any final comments that you may have.
I would like to be very short in the reply, because I think what the crisis has shown is that there are some, I would say, abnormalities in the way how electricity prices are set. It is not normal that the electricity price rise also for those that are producing electricity by renewables. So when I talk about a market reform or a reform and a redesign of the market, it is not to completely reverse everything what we have built up. Some say, okay, we have to take it back into national government's hands, into public hands, the energy market, like it used to be many decades ago, maybe in a few countries. That's also not a solution, but that we need to redesign the markets to control the prices better and to go to a more normal situation is for us an obvious reality. But indeed, we don't need to take overnight decisions. We don't need to take decisions which are based on panic. But I mean, the abnormalities have to be taken out. That's for us clear. Secondly, when it's about affordability, I would like to add something. It's not, the coin is not the same for, or the reality is not the same for everyone. When I talk about realities in industry, I can see a huge difference between small and medium-sized enterprises, even employing 300-400 people. They don't have the same means to discuss and to negotiate prices than the big companies. I don't want to mention the name, but you probably also have read about a German important car manufacturer that that signed gas contracts 2 years ago when the prices were very low, and that wanted to shift the own electricity production from coal-based electricity to gas-based electricity. Well, the intention is to put that on the market again, the contract, and that will just bring them 400 million of profits just by not using the gas, but by bringing it back on the market. Well, these abnormalities also have to be tackled. We cannot accept that. Yeah, okay, I would like to limit it to that, and I leave it up to other colleagues to reply on other parts of the questions.
Go ahead.
Okay, yes, I'll try and be short also on all the questions. First of all, yes, when we say we need to do something, we have to be very cautious about what is considered as one of the successes of the EU construction, which is the electricity market. So it's up till now, it has functioned quite well. So before we throw the baby with the bath, as we say, have to be very, very cautious. Although we need to take some mitigation measures to avoid during this crisis. Second, on long-term contracts, yes, we are pleading for long-term contracts that's on top of this market to complement the fact that the price is set the way it is set, to enable investment also in renewables to enable and investment. So we are pleading for more long-term contracts, whether in gas to supply for LNG for a certain number of years to avoid this ups and downs, or in electricity. Today, it's very difficult in Europe to have a trans-border, transnational PPA. So to build a capacity, for instance, a huge solar farm in Spain and have a go green. I give this example because this is a concrete internal example within Total Energies to feed with this renewable energy one of our refineries in the Netherlands. It's a headache. It's not possible. Long-term contracts to de-risk the building of this huge renewable capacity in Spain because of the one-year limitations of TSOs and things like that. So this needs to be worked on to allow to have, so that our industries can have a cap on the price they're going to pay for renewable energy for the coming years. So this is something that needs to be worked on. Now, on the what can be done for the mitigation measures and we're discussing that with the platform, the European platform to attract gas. Probably if you're too stringent on a cap of gas, then you need to take mitigation measures to avoid scarcity and to avoid and to guarantee the security of supply. LNG, we're in a global market. If the Asia goes back and if China, when China wakes up again, I mean, we're going to have to compete against China for LNG, and to be sure that we don't get another supply crisis in Europe, we have to be very cautious. Perhaps we have to deal on a global level in Europe on non-redirection clauses of long-term contracts. That means to guarantee that Qatar is not going to be, even if the price with a cap and a floor. This is something that can be done. That's there are non-redirection clauses, even if the prices start getting higher in Asia. And last but not least, the Spanish case. We've looked carefully at the Spanish case. It's interesting. Everybody says it's interesting because it was an island, because of course it was providing cheaper electricity than the one that could be produced in France on the other side of the border. So it was sort of subsidized electricity at a certain point. So if it happens but it's very interesting because it's not a general cap on gas, so it's rather light subsidy, but that is on all citizens. So it's very interesting if it's done at European level, perhaps. Yes. So this is one of the things that is going to be discussed as a quick measure so why not?
Thank you, Gabriele. If we're closing in reverse order, I think Simone would be next. Simone.
Yes, no, very quickly on just on the last 2 points on LNG. You are absolutely right. Of course, it was an implicit of my point. Putting a cap on TTF means putting a cap on contracts related to the pipe transport. No. Of course, for LNG, some different mechanisms must be introduced, but there are different ideas, including some kind of pooled provision at European level or contract for difference. There are technical solutions for that, but you're perfectly right. Of course, we may limit the price at the reasonable European price level. The gas coming through pipes, but of course we need to find a way to be competitive for LNG. But in any case, as you know, we are paying LNG much more than other geographies, which is again something which is strange. On Spain, I fully agree. I mean, a Spanish model is a very strange model. No, we are, if you want, is a model for what Spanish citizens are subsidizing export of gas burning electricity to France by boosting the demand of gas in Europe. So it's pretty strange. But if you promote a coherent European mechanism, this may work, but actually is not very far away from what the European Commission just proposed, putting a revenue cap on inframarginal technologies. So if you want the end game of the Commission proposal is very close to the generalization of the Spanish model. And I think it's perfectly right. What we don't like of the European proposal is the fact that there is a cap, which is a European cap, and then member states are allowed to define different mechanisms or different or lower caps. That's bad because it's not fixing, it's not solving the problem of fragmentation. Much better to put a lower cap, even a robustly, significantly lower cap, but then the mechanism should be coherent at European level.
Go ahead.
Well, thank you. I think it comes through the debate that we need a massive amount of investments in all sorts of things, energy efficiency, renewables, storage, hard-to-abate sectors, etc. So a massive amount of investment. So one of the questions I would ask is what is being done with the profits that are being made massively. The oil and gas sector makes massive profits, you know, mostly outside Europe, but Total Energies is one of the few big, you know, European companies. So my attention would go, where are these profits going to be invested? And we heard some good news from Gabriel. But coming to the Spanish question, the price issue is an important issue. But if the price issue bites into the future investments, we shoot ourselves in the foot. And that is where we should have, you know, the easy calls, in my view, the two easy calls, and saying, let's tax the windmills. The offshore windmills, they make windfall profits. Fine. But it's only 2-3 years ago that we were subsidizing them because they were so expensive. And so we were pushing them to do this. And now that they make their first profits that are sizable, we say, oh, no, they cannot do that. Because we need the right investments, and those investments need to be profitable. On the ETS question, I think it's very welcome to remind ourselves it's a cap and trade, and it allows for a lot of flexibility. The point I was making is that the easy thing, the fuel switching from coal to gas, has gone. So we are more in the difficult area. It is through renewables, energy efficiency in companies and households and in hard-to-abate sectors that we are going to deliver the reductions. And these take a bit more time. And if we can buy some time to bring some allowances to the market and invest in the right things, then those emission reductions are going to be delivered. So advancing, forwarding amounts of money on the Innovation Fund or the Modernization Fund is, I think, an excellent idea because it takes a bit of time before it materializes. And final comment on the energy security. I think in Europe we need a new, fresh thinking on a geopolitical strategy related to energy. And funny enough, if you think it through, there is good news in it. We are now talking differently to countries we were hardly talking about. Think about Egypt, or Algeria, or Morocco, or Namibia, or Oman, apart from the Middle East, you know, not to always fall into the trap, it is Qatar or it is Saudi Arabia. You know, there is a raft of new countries that are seeing this as an opportunity. So again, if we can drive the investments, have the investments done, have a good diversification of our risk, and that is what we were losing with Russia. If your entire economy depends up to 55%, some member states up to 80% on gas coming from Russia, then you are gambling big. But if you diversify your risk, we will use some gas, we will use some oil, but we are going to massively see renewables, green hydrogen taking place in countries we hardly really thought hard about what they could do.
Thank you, Jos. And Minister Jablonski, what's your recipe to get us out of this situation? We heard from Gabriel that this year may be not easy, but certainly that next year may actually be the difficult test. So do we have a year to act, or this is something more urgent? You know, just some of your reactions, because I really do appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Well, I would like to say that we have more time, that we can have 1 year or 2 years. And I fully agree with all the comments highlighting the necessity of investments. I fully agree. We should invest as much as possible. We should mobilize additional funds, the surplus from permits, the profits from permits revenues, also the windfall profits. This should be used for these purposes, to both to invest in modern sources, or both in solar and wind, in hydrogen technologies, also in gas by increasing our capacities, most of all in LNG terminals. I think there is still a lot to do in this regard. Obviously, there are some bottlenecks, but we already identified them, and we can increase it and be more resilient. But these are the solutions for 5 years, 10 years time. Until it's fulfilled, until it's built, it will take some time to be more resilient. We also have to address the issue of today, and if we want to resolve the crisis that will be here in the next decade, first we need to address the crisis that is here at our doors already. And if we won't do it, we will simply lose any political support that we might have for continuing to fight against climate change, to continue the changes that have been implemented so far. If we lose this political support, some political forces will come that would not only stop this change, but would actually reverse some positive elements that were implemented. And I think this brings us to the most important question that many still even refuse to ask. Are we indeed fit for 55%? Maybe we are, I don't know. Maybe we are fit for only 50 or 45. I would actually like us to be fit for more than that. But we need to seriously consider our possibilities, our capabilities, because if we want to address this, as it was rightly mentioned, we already have around 50 to 55% of households struggling to pay their monthly electricity bills. And if we refuse to acknowledge this fact, we can obviously keep saying that these targets should not be discussed, and we will keep on simply strangling our businesses, our industries. These emissions will not disappear. They will move out of Europe to other countries. They will move to China, they will move to India, they will move to other countries that have simply easier, more lenient regulations, and this will be the result. So we need to seriously consider not just about the bona fide goals, but also the possibility whether we are able to achieve them. Maybe it will be better to consider that we can have some leniency in these difficult times, and I think we should take this into account. Thank you.
Thank you all. A few remarks. One thing that I think we all learned is, we learned this in the carbon markets actually a few years ago. When the carbon market collapsed, it was why? Because the people who got into that market, everybody lost their shirt, except a couple of people that had actually serious managers that hedged. And there were a couple of companies, but most of this project developer in the CDM never hedged because they saw the prices always go up. And that ended up in a disaster. So there was no plan B. Now, in this case, what we learned that plan B is necessary, and the plan B was the plan B in the sense of the dependence on a source of energy. That is not right. I don't care whether it's Russia or whatever it is, but it's not a good thing in general not to diversify. So not diversifying may not have been a great idea, but we learned something. But also we should have learned that there had to be a plan B, because this Russian war never was expected, but it happened. So there was no plan B. So maybe we should learn in the future. The second thing that I wanted to say was that there are drinks outside, which is important. The third thing I wanted to say is that as ERCST, we went through a hell of a day today. And I'm very proud that the staff of ERCST, my colleagues, helped, and we went through 3 events and an annual general meeting. So I'm very grateful to all of you for this. And in the case of this particular event, Antonio and Bente have put a lot of effort into this and make it happen. We prayed a lot for people to come, and in the end, okay, our prayers were answered. We would have liked to be answered even more, but they were answered. And last but not least, I would be really, really amiss not to say that my colleague and my dear colleague and friend here, is his birthday, so we all have to wish him happy birthday. So, no, I promised him I won't do it, but in the end I couldn't resist because I'm too relaxed now. So let's go outside and have a drink. And again, thanks to Simone and Pawel, Jablonski and Gabriel and Luke and Joss, always here for us. Thank you all for being here. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
So much if I could grab it, I would hug it.
My life, my life, my life.
Cause everybody loves the sunshine.
In the sunshine.